Despite being remembered for his bravado and forceful political stances, Teddy Roosevelt was a sickly child who frequently suffered from asthma. He had to build his strength piece by piece as a teenager. Theodore Roosevelt is celebrated today as a man of character who climbed to the highest political position in America, and then led it well. He had a hand in the Spanish-American War and led the United States from 1901 to 1909. Teddy Roosevelt wanted to remove corruption and build a better country, and he started much of his work before he even set foot in the White House. Once he became president, he showed a remarkable ability to uphold his morals by protecting the little people and doing what was best for the nation. His stories remind us of the American dream, showing that when we are dedicated to improving the world around us, the challenges we encounter give us the drive to continue. The United States is a better place because of Theodore Roosevelt's efforts. Here are 5 ways Teddy Roosevelt changed America. Number 1. Roosevelt gave America its Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. Theodore Roosevelt was involved in politics long before he became president, but one of his most famous early exploits was not political. When the Spanish-American War broke out, Roosevelt wanted to fight for his country, even though many of his fellow politicians urged him to remain in the States. Even President McKinley asked him to stay. However, Teddy Roosevelt was ready to practice what he had been preaching. On May 6, 1898, he resigned from his governmental position to join the armed forces. Volunteering wasn't enough for Teddy Roosevelt. Instead, he assembled a volunteer cavalry regiment mainly consisting of ranch hands and cops. It was an ethnically diverse group, but when the group went south to San Antonio, Texas to train, they were too rowdy for the locals. These were the Rough Riders. Theodore was the lieutenant colonel because he had no commanding military experience, and Colonel Leonard Wood led the group. After training in San Antonio, they moved to Tampa, Florida, and then to Cuba. Even though they were called the Rough Riders, most of them did not ride horses into battle. This technicality did not stop them from taking critical victories during the war. They played an essential part in the Battle of San Juan Hill by pushing the Spanish from Kettle Hill to San Juan Hill and overwhelming them with their fierce enthusiasm. The United States Navy obliterated the Spanish Navy in this battle, leaving the Spanish trapped in a siege until they surrendered. The Rough Riders are fondly remembered in American history, and their efforts during the Spanish-American War have become part of the American mythos. They were a tough group led by one of America's great future presidents, and their victories directly aided Teddy Roosevelt's rise to popularity. After returning and clearing quarantine, Roosevelt rejoined politics with the Republican Party as New York's governor. The stories of the Rough Riders continue to carry him through his political career and inspire people today to remember the honor of fighting for one's country with enthusiasm. Number 2. The Panama Canal was one of Roosevelt's projects. For hundreds of years, the only way to transport a ship from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean was to go around the tip of South America or attempt to cross north of Canada. Both took a lot of time, and it cost a lot of money to ship goods. Theodore Roosevelt was also worried the American Navy would not be able to respond if needed quickly. At the time, the European colonial powers held land in both the Atlantic and Pacific. Roosevelt was concerned about international security. They needed a faster way to move fleets from one side of the United States to the other, necessitating a canal. The narrowest part of the Americas was an area in Central America called Panama, which was only about 50 miles wide. At first, Panama was part of the Republic of Colombia. The Americans began working on a deal with them to rent the land and cut a canal through Panama for American ships to cross through. The two parties were still negotiating when Colombia suddenly erupted in revolution. Panama was trying to separate from Colombia. Theodore Roosevelt did not start the revolution, but quickly sent his support to Panama, ensuring their success. The American battleship in the area stopped Colombian incursions, but also angered the Colombian people. After Panama won its freedom, the United States set to work on building the Panama Canal. It was 10 years before it was ready, but when the First World War began, the canal immediately proved its usefulness. The United States had a tactical advantage thanks to Roosevelt's forward thinking. Now controlled by Panama, the canal is a critical part of international affairs today. It is a significant part of global transportation. About 40 ships go through the canal daily, making it indispensable to modern life. Number 3. He started the idea of the United States Department of Commerce and Labor. Teddy Roosevelt prided himself on being a trust buster. At the time, trusts were tight monopolies that impacted free trade in particular industries. Once he became president in 1901, he focused on stopping these monopolies. One of the biggest trusts Roosevelt broke was held by J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities Company, a railroad company. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court in 1903, and they sided with him, stating that the J.P. Morgan Company was impacting free trade. He also stepped in to mitigate a coal miners' strike. Although we now use other energy sources as well, coal was a primary source during his presidency. When the workers threatened to strike, many people risked not having heat for the winter, creating a national emergency. Roosevelt ordered both sides to meet with him to find an agreement. The workers wanted their union recognized, higher pay, and reduced hours, asking to only work 8 hours a day. The company refused to agree. Instead, they asked the president to send the army to force the workers back to work. That did not sit well with President Roosevelt, who had always supported the average worker. He told the company if they could not come to an agreement with their laborers, he would send in the army, but the military would support the workers and take control of the coal mines. This declaration forced the company to change its perspective, finally allowing Roosevelt to start a commission to arbitrate the conflict and settle on an agreement that worked for everyone. Once again, Teddy Roosevelt stuck to his values and made life better for the average American. Roosevelt was deeply concerned for the average workers across the country, whom he felt corporations took advantage of. He wanted a square deal for every man. His work eventually helped found the United States Department of Commerce and Labor. Today, the Department of Labor focuses on improving employment opportunities and conditions for the laborers of America. They document wages, professions, and even workplace safety. The Department of Labor sets minimum wage and overtime and helps protect employees against discrimination. Number 4. Theodore Roosevelt established national parks. The national parks are some of America's most prized possessions. Today, 424 national park sites cover about 84 million acres. However, only 63 have national park as part of their name. These parks are dedicated to maintaining the nation's resources, so they limit the number of people admitted and protect national resources from commercialism. This system helps to protect plant and animal species, keeping a portion of America's biodiversity for people to learn about and experience. The national parks are located across the country, covering a wide range of ecosystems that encompass the diversity of the United States. Long before conservation and environmentalism were topics readily discussed in American politics, Teddy Roosevelt worked on saving the United States' natural habitats. His primary focus was the forests. Theodore Roosevelt loved the outdoors and wanted to create a safe space from industrialization. In 1905, he established about 150 million acres of natural preserves, parks, and forests. 18 of these sites became national monuments. Roosevelt started the United States Forest Service to protect and keep up with these areas. His forethought saved thousands of acres that may have been irretrievably lost, giving us some of America's most beautiful outdoor spaces today. Of course, not all national park sites focus on natural beauty. Many of the current 424 park sites focus on history, such as battlefields, historic sites, and memorials. These include places like the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and the Pullman National Monument in Chicago. These places offer educational opportunities for people. Although Roosevelt was interested in protecting the land and resources, the numerous other sites today help promote the appreciation and cultural literacy that carry on his legacy. Number 5. The FDA was founded thanks to Roosevelt's efforts. Proper food and drug safety may seem so obvious that it doesn't need laws, but this was not the case when Roosevelt was president. Because there was not much legislation at the time, companies were selling harmful consumable products. One of the most publicized was the meat industry. Meat processing facilities were cesspools of malpractice, dangerous working environments, and unsafe food. Disposing of spoiled meat may seem like common sense, but companies often dyed the meat with food coloring and sold it as fresh. Also, the processing environment was dangerous for the workers, who occasionally lost fingers and hands in accidents. Even more disturbing, the workers' lost appendages would wind up in the meat, which was then sold to the general public. The nation, including President Roosevelt, became outraged when this information became public. There were also increasing concerns about unhealthy medications. The president passed several acts, such as the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act, to ensure the quality of America's food. Despite massive pushback from food and drug companies saying their rights were being infringed upon, Theodore Roosevelt pushed these laws through because he believed people had the right to safe food. In particular, the meat industry finally began properly maintaining its stock after the president started inspection rules to force the companies to value public safety and product quality in addition to profit. The FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, eventually came from the Pure Food and Drug Act. The FDA watches over about $2.7 trillion of food, tobacco, and medications today. They manage domestic and imported items and have regulations reaching from farms to restaurants, and even vending machines. However, the FDA does not monitor meat and some egg products. The Department of Agriculture keeps those industries aligned with national standards. Together, these government agencies work to keep the products we consume safe. Companies are no longer allowed to add fillers to reduce the quality of the product, use food coloring to hide issues, or add items to their products known to be harmful. Although we are still working towards a society free from these problems, the FDA and the Department of Agriculture help hold companies accountable for the products they sell to the public. The United States would be a very different nation today if Theodore Roosevelt had not invested so much in his country. He reminded his fellow citizens of the importance of having pride in one's country. Even after he stepped down from the presidency, he continued to work for the nation's good. Roosevelt even ran for office again in 1912 when he felt President Taft was not up to the job. His life continues to remind us that our lives are about more than making a profit, and progress should not come at the expense of the little people, the very people Roosevelt dedicated his life to supporting. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Teddy Roosevelt, check out our book, Teddy Roosevelt, A Captivating Guide to the Life of Theodore Roosevelt, who served as the 26th President of the United States. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.